Hi everyone, and welcome back to another webinar in our Rethinking Manufacturing series brought to you by BDO Australia. So my name is Ryan Pollett and I'm BDO's National Manufacturing and Wholesale Leader. So if you've joined us for a previous webinar in the series, then welcome back. It's nice to have you back with us and great to see you again. If this is your first time joining us for one of these webinars, then our Rethinking Manufacturing webinar series is all about tackling the big issues for Australian manufacturers in today's world, sharing insights from a range of perspectives and backgrounds, including technology, international trade, tax, sustainability, and more. All of our other previous webinars are available on our website. To access them, my team are adding in some links in the chat box that you should have on your screen to some of those recordings. But before we go any further, I'll just quickly draw your attention to some housekeeping matters. And there's a slide that's just come up now on the screen. So to start, this webinar will follow a panel style Q&A format rather than being a slide-based presentation. We have put together a handout that you can access in the handouts tab, but the actual format will be more of a Q&A discussion. So while everyone listening is automatically muted, we do encourage you to contribute today by submitting questions via the questions tab. We aim to answer all those questions during the webinar if we can, but if we can't get to yours, then we'll try and follow up with you afterwards to give you an answer to those. So this session today is being recorded. Everyone will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording, any handouts or materials that we reference, as well as an invitation to register for our next Rethinking Manufacturing webinar, which is going to be the SME's Practical Guide to the Modern Manufacturing Strategy, which is being held next week on the 10th of December. So finally, if you have any technical difficulties, please click the support button, which is one of the bottom tabs on your screen. Okay, so just to get into today's topic, we're going to be talking about Australia's modern manufacturing strategy, what it means for business, the greater economy, and how it will shape the future of Australia's manufacturing industry. So to help us tackle these big questions, we've put together a great panel today with industry, economic, and trade experts. But before I get into that in more detail, I'll just give you all a quick background on the strategy itself. So announced in the government's recent budget back in October, the Modern Manufacturing Strategy is a $1.5 billion investment in Australian manufacturing over the next 5 years, targeting 6 national priorities. These are the areas of either competitive strength or strategic national priority. And these priorities identified are resources, technology and critical minerals, food and beverages, medical products, recycling and clean energy, defence and space. And according to Scott Morrison, the goal of the manufacturing strategy is to play to Australia's strengths, improve collaboration and commercialisation, and create a sector that is modern, dynamic and highly skilled. And we'll be talking about some of those factors today and how much the modern manufacturing strategy will support that. The government is going to be collaborating with industry to develop short and long-term roadmaps for these priority sectors, with industry funding to be provided through 3 programs. There's a Modern Manufacturing Initiative, the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, and the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund. Okay, so just to quickly introduce the speakers today, or the panel today. So joining us today, we've got Adelaide Timbrell, who's an economist in the ANZ research team. Hi, Adelaide. So Adelaide regularly provides insight on Australia's macroeconomy with a special focus on Australian households, retail trade and the housing market. Prior to joining ANZ, Adelaide spent 5 years in economics consulting, providing research for a wide range of property, retail and government clients. Also with us today, and a regular panel member, is the AMGC National Director of Industry, Michael Sharpe. Hi, Michael. So Michael plays a key role in engaging with industry across Australia, including linking partnerships among the country's manufacturers and research facilities, which is vital for creating high-value jobs and products through collaborative projects. Now, Michael, as you the regular watchers will know, often joins us on the road, and he's in his car again today, so hasn't disappointed us there. Do you want to just let us know where you are today, Michael?
Well, you might call it a car, Ryan, but I prefer to call this the mobile Zoom studio. And so today I'm coming to you from Wagga Wagga in regional New South Wales. Hi to everyone.
Excellent. Thanks, Michael. And finally, joining us on the panel is Bill Cole, also a returning panel member. He's the International Trade Partner at BDO. Hi, Bill. So Bill's an international trade expert with a history of delivering successful outcomes for businesses in the international trade sphere, skilled in all aspects of transnational commerce. Bill has particularly strong skills in the analysis of border regulation and its effects on business models and cost outcomes. Okay, so welcome to the panel. So without further ado, I think we'll get into a few questions. Yeah, the first kind of section of the webinar today, I think we'll just look at some of the general economic trends and how the modern manufacturing strategy interacts with those and what's going on in the economy at the moment. And if possible, I'd like to start with you, Michael, if that's okay, just to give a bit of an intro and get your take, I suppose, on the government's new modern manufacturing strategy, which I outlined before. What do you see as its greatest benefits for the manufacturing sector?
Well, right now the government is asking for feedback from industry. So I would encourage everyone out there to Google the modern manufacturing strategy, go through the links there and you'll see around the supply chain initiative and others. And you can provide feedback, because I think there's never been a better time to put your own advice to government and tell them how you think manufacturing should be going and what it should look like. So today and over several weeks, is your opportunity to do that right now. But manufacturing, I can tell you from all across the various states that I've been travelling to, and I was in South Australia last month, and Queensland before they shut the border, and it's great that the border's open again now. And I think I told you earlier, Ryan, that I crossed the border into Victoria yesterday, so that was a first for many, many months. But manufacturing, no matter where I've been travelling to, is performing well. And one of the biggest issues that business owners are telling me is just getting the staff. So I was in Dubbo recently, and there's a whole heap of job vacancies going out at Dubbo right now across a range of skill sets. And so for me, that shows that manufacturing is growing. We saw the PMI come out this week, which shows that manufacturing is growing across the country. So this is good news. And, we've all had to adapt this year for change. We set up the manufacturing response portal for COVID, where people were able to purchase medical PPE, and if you manufactured that sort of equipment, you're able to put that on our website, and that's been performing very well. But overall, I think the highlight of this year for me is the fact that everyone, each and every person, is talking about manufacturing. That's a game changer from my perspective.
Yeah, 100% agree, Michael. Thank you. And perhaps Adelaide, I can get your take on this as well. In terms of the economic impacts, what do you think the modern manufacturing strategy will do for the wider economy?
I think that there are a few things that COVID-19 in particular has changed about the economy, which manufacturing could be real positive for. So one thing is, we have seen unemployment rise quite substantially over the last year. If we look at it in terms of total job numbers, we've actually seen over the last year 187,000 fewer full-time jobs and 54,000 extra part-time jobs. So we're still, over 100,000 less jobs in the economy as there were this time last year. But more importantly, we're seeing a lot more part-time work and less full-time work. One of the great things about the manufacturing industry is it does provide a lot more scope than, say, hospitality or tourism related industries to provide that secure employment, to provide growth of skills and productivity in the economy. We've also seen through COVID that our position as a small kind of open economy does give some risks around supply chains, and allowing some nationalisation of manufacturing and other industrial production could be something that creates some risks, particularly when we're seeing increased nationalism and popularism in the geopolitical landscape, and that's something that just kind of saves us a little bit from some of those supply risks, if and when we do see another global coordinated downturn. COVID-19 has really restricted people's movements, and we'll continue to see that over the next couple of years, but it's also allowed people to be buying more physical goods and less services, which increases demand for manufacturing products as well.
Thanks, Adelaide. Yeah, I think totally agree with what you said. And yeah, I mean, the impetus for creating jobs is great to hear that there's some great potential there with the strategy as it is. I mean, that's one of the stated goals of the strategy. So it ties in well with the potential for growth that we just talked about with the manufacturing side of things. The other thing I'd probably like to talk a little bit about is the strategy focuses on 6 priority areas, as we touched on earlier. So those 6 areas that the government's identified that Australia has a potential competitive advantage. The term I've seen used in some places is, picking winners, which is one way of putting it. I guess I'd be interested to get everyone's thoughts on this, and maybe Bill, I could start with you. What do you think about that strategy of sort of picking winners? Do you think it's a good way forward in terms of the way that we should be approaching this? Do you think it will see, some companies or some subsectors benefit at the expense of others, or will there be a flow-on effect of overall positivity for the whole sector? Do you have any thoughts, Bill, first, I guess, on that?
Well, thank you, Ryan. I think, I suppose I'd make the observation that it reverses probably 25 years of industry policy approach, which was not to pick winners and to rely on broader, healthy economic settings to be the breeding ground for new and innovative industries. But putting that aside, the COVID in the current era has seen a number of factors collide in our international trade settings. So we have the pandemic, which resulted in some systemic failures in supply chains and markets, but importantly, it combined with trade war impacts. Now, what the modern manufacturing initiative has the potential to diversify the goods and qualities that we produce. If we are going to seek diversified destinations and markets for our goods in a broader array of countries over a broader array of times, then we need a more complex economy. We don't have that at the moment. So more is better, diversity is good, and out of those mixes, we improve our chances of creating substantial markets in countries that are currently very undercooked or non-existent as a destination for our goods. So economic growth paths could be assisted by this.
Thanks, Bill. That's a great comment. Michael or Adelaide, would you like to add anything further to that discussion?
Yeah, we always encourage everyone to have a look at Manufacturing Academy, because we've got business owners that are sharing their own journey about how they're transforming their business today. So it's our research, which we've gathered over the last 5 years. Our latest report is the 10 ways to succeed in Australian manufacturing, which has just recently been published. So it's available for free for anyone to download and have a look at that. But on the Manufacturing Academy platform, you can hear and see how people are doing it in their own business today. And just one example of a company that might not necessarily be in that priority area is a company called Nicholas Hacko Watches in Sydney. And so during COVID, they've actually been selling more watches than ever. And they're the only watch manufacturer in Australia. They've got some pretty awesome engineering equipment to make very intricate parts for the watches, high value product. Because people have been at home, they've been Googling and look at the Instagram feed for Hacko watches. So take a look at that one. But they've been then ordering those watches online. So that company has actually put staff on during COVID to cater for that demand, but they're also diversifying their business. So when I reached out to them earlier in the year and looked at how other options they could take, they've decided to look at how they could get engaged with the Australian space industry. And so we've recently launched the Australian Space Agency, which is now headquartered in Adelaide. We've got the greatest defence budget in our nation's history, some $270 billion. And so Nicholas Hacko Watches saw that as an opportunity to get engaged with. I was able to help make some connections along that journey. And just last week, they've made their first space project in partnership with Sydney University. So this is a way that Australian manufacturing can create more complex goods, potentially export those goods globally and be part of a global supply chain. There's growing opportunities across a range of subsectors right now.
Thanks, Michael. Adelaide, was there any thoughts that you had around the picking winners concept and whether you think that's a good way forward?
No, I think Bill and Michael really summarised that very well, so I'll leave it.
All good. Okay. Well, I think perhaps a follow-up question for you then, Adelaide, because I know you've got to focus on Australian households. I suppose I was just wondering if there's any trends that you've seen through your work in terms of the consumer space that might present opportunities for Australian manufacturers. Is there anything that you've come across that might be worth bringing up?
Absolutely. So one of the main things that has characterised household consumption through the pandemic and through this year has been a real reversal of a really long-term trend where we've seen people spend more money on experiences and less money on physical goods. At the moment, we're seeing a real revival of buying physical goods, as well as a deeper penetration of online shopping across the community. So one thing that we've seen through the pandemic is that a lot of people who have never shopped online before or have really avoided online shopping have gotten a bit used to it. We've seen the percentage of shopping that occurs online really rise. And that's allowing people to buy physical goods more easily and more accessibly as well. We're also seeing really strong growth in household furniture, in electronics, and in other physical goods consumption from kind of the discretionary spending side. And in our housing analysis, we've actually seen that quite a lot of people are more and more looking for home office nooks and home study spaces, which means more demand for office-related products, both in offices and at the home. So basically doubling the amount of monitors, keyboards, desks that the average worker would require. And that kind of capital deepening within kind of both households and businesses is something where we may see some increased demand for manufactured products. I think COVID as well has really given people a bit of that kind of renationalisation preference. And so, you know, locally sourced food products and other kind of agriculture within Australia may get a boost from that as well.
Great, fantastic. Thank you. Some great suggestions there. I suppose just one other question, Adelaide, just following on from that. One of the first steps of the Strategies Action Plan is to get the right economic conditions for business. Do you have a view as to what those conditions might look like in order for the manufacturing sector to succeed and how that might impact in the long term?
Absolutely. So I think government support within manufacturing, but also within the business landscape in Australia more broadly has been really critical through this year. So what we've seen in the October budget more broadly has been, you know, tax write-offs for asset purchases, lower kind of tax burdens for both households and businesses, and other government support for investment. That's a really important side of things because I think in Australia we are already a relatively high cost nation. We have high labour costs, we have high land costs, and so anything the government can do to make that take away a little bit of the cost of that risk of investing in high productivity is really important. And also those lower interest rates and low exchange rates really help as well. The Reserve Bank is putting some work into keeping our exchange rate at an acceptable level and keeping interest rates really low. And it's not just about the interest rates being low, it's also about the outlook being relatively certain as well. So that strong forward guidance has really helped. One of the downsides in the Australian economy for business right now is that when we look into the next 6 to 12 months, we're seeing higher unemployment, we're seeing negative real wage growth. So even if the number of dollars on that pay packet goes up, the amount of spare cash after the bills, the groceries and the rent may not be going up, and then less immigration. So all of those things together means that an Australian business who's looking locally is seeing less people coming in than usual, less tourists, less immigration, and then for the people who remain, they're less likely to be employed and they are more likely to not be getting that pay rise. So there are some risks around there, and I think anything that the government or the private sector as well can do to increase cash flow for people and also give people a little bit of confidence and a little bit of extra spending money, that's going to stimulate the economy more broadly and give the manufacturing sector a bigger market locally to work with as well.
Great, thank you Adelaide. Great summary there. And I suppose, Michael, just maybe looking, see if you've got any further comments on any of that, and also just tying it into the modern manufacturing strategy again. Manufacturing being a capital-intensive industry, do you think that the strategy will provide enough support or incentives for existing manufacturers as well as new entrants to achieve the government's goals? Do you have any thoughts around any of that?
There's going to be so much opportunity for the manufacturing community right across Australia, not just from the federal government, but the state government programs as well. For example, right now in New South Wales, they've just launched the Regional Job Creation Fund. And so people can Google that, but that's an initiative to help industry across the board. But for our manufacturers, some support there, which is very good. So I'm sure we'll see more of that. But with the modern manufacturing strategy, which incorporates the modernisation fund, that'll be opening in the next few days, I've been told. So if you were able to engage in the first round, that's good. Have a look at this second round that's coming up, and there's an opportunity there for capital investment into equipment for manufacturing. So there's growing opportunities, there's much more to come. But as I said earlier, the government's looking for your feedback now, so now's the opportunity. To Adelaide's points around people spending more and buying manufactured goods here in Australia, absolutely. I mean, that's why we're seeing manufacturing growing. We've had this shift in the way people think and want to shop online, which is a natural consequence, just the way that I can talk to you from the car here in Wagga Wagga today. We've all changed and adapted to the new technology and the way of doing things. So this is why I say to our members, if people are willing to purchase your product online, which we've got more and more of our members doing, selling their goods online, what about the packaging that goes with it? And I think in an earlier seminar, Ryan, we talked about the packaging side of one of our members and the way that they were able to design the packaging and the labeling and branding that goes onto the cardboard box of this particular company. It tells the story. So just like when you buy the Apple iPhone, you've got an expectation that it's going to turn up in a quality package and have the instructions to go with it. I think if people are prepared to pay a premium for your product online, when it arrives, it's got to show that quality and got to share that story that goes with it. And then they'll tell their friends and they'll share it with their friends on social media and spread the word for you. We've seen companies grow just from their social media engagement. So one of the things that I like to tell our members right across the board is to have a look at their social media content and their strategy for growing that, because now more than ever, it's a great opportunity.
Excellent, thank you, Michael. And I suppose interesting just to hear whether you've come across any companies on your travels, at the other end of the scale that obviously during this period, JobKeeper incentives have been available, and there's been a certain amount of support from banks, etc. Have you come across? It sounds very positive that most of the companies you've been talking to, have you come across any that have found it difficult over this period, and are they concerned about the end of those incentives in March?
The feedback that I get is people saying that JobKeepers work too well. I need staff and we need them to come out of their home and come and work for us. We need welders, we need drafts people, the whole gamut of skills. So that really is a positive sign, and it's a great thing for Australia, right? But that opportunity needs to keep going forward. And so particularly in the regional towns and cities across Australia, we need to attract those people to want to come to places like Dubbo and want to bring their family with them and take a long-term position and working in manufacturing in those regional areas. The companies that are being smart about it are looking at how they can attract those people to want to come to the regions. And I think there's a bright future if it's done right. And this is all engaging. I see that the local councils have a role to play. So upgrading the infrastructure that comes with it. We've got to look at our transport infrastructure as well, because it's one thing to be able to manufacture in regional Australia, but how do you get your goods to the port? And what opportunities are there to help you become an exporter? Because we know that through our research, we need more and more Australian companies to look at export opportunities. We've got this whole global marketplace. They're all going online. Just one point on that, Ryan, is that, we know in the space industry, which this is great that Australia is really engaging now, but the satellite technology that's coming with it, Australia is leading the way in so many paths with satellite technology. But we're going to have something like 30,000 satellites going around the world in the coming years, which means people can communicate more than ever before. And I heard a seminar last week where we're going to have 2 billion more people having access to the internet. So think of that growing opportunity for online sales is just one small component of having this communication transformation around the world. And so now's the time to really ramp up your business and look at how you can sell, because our research shows that, you know, manufacturers are very good at making stuff. We've got some great reputations here in Australia, but we're not necessarily so good at telling our story and selling our goods to the world. So there is an opportunity to improve on that.
Totally agree. Thank you. And yeah, we'll talk a bit about that international trade aspect in further detail shortly. And just before we move on from this point, Adelaide, I'd just be interested to hear your thoughts around the end of JobKeeper and what impact that might have on the economy. I don't know, I guess manufacturing might be slightly different impact from what Michael's saying. I don't know whether you've got a similar view or something different.
I think that broadly with JobKeeper, yeah, it has really helped a lot of businesses and households get some extra money. We know that people under 20 on average got a pay rise this year because of JobKeeper. But what JobKeeper has done, and it really has been the biggest single line of fiscal support that we've seen this year, it's reduced the total amount of economic pain by keeping businesses attached to their workers and also keeping those businesses going in really hard times. But what it's also done has delayed the economic pain that does remain. So we're seeing in the March quarter, as fewer companies become eligible for JobKeeper, as JobKeeper fades down to zero, we're going to see more insolvencies and more unemployment than we have kind of in the 6 months where we were getting that JobKeeper. So, you know, we saw 870,000 job losses between March and May. We're not going to see that again. That was because of lockdowns. But what we will see is this year, we actually saw fewer insolvencies than we would see in a normal year for business. That's not because business was booming. That is because everybody got a huge wage subsidy. So next year, some of those businesses that were destined to fail anyway are likely to see that happen. That creates more unemployment and a little bit of an economic activity bump in the road as well. However, GDP did go up more than expected in the September quarter. It went up by 3.3%. We're expecting to see more economic growth down the line as well. And a lot of upward surprises in business conditions and economic data do point to maybe a little bit less of a rise in some of those negative outcomes compared to what we would have thought, you know, 6 months ago.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Adelaide.
And Ryan, I think some programs out there that are programs out there supporting you know, the employment side of things right now around the apprenticeship. So we've seen that new apprenticeship program come out recently. There's also a program that everyone out there might like to have a Google of Apr Intern. And so Apr Intern is a federal government funded program for postdoc PhD students to come and work in your business. And up until recently, the federal government have been co-funding that. They'll pay 50% of their salary to come and work on a project in your business. As of last month, they've upped that now to 90% of the salary that the federal government will pay for these students, PhD students, to come and work in your business. So there's new opportunities like that that business owners can take advantage of. So feel free to Google that. And as always, feel free to reach out and contact me on LinkedIn or send me an email, and always happy to offer advice.
Thank you. Yeah, some great tips there as well, and I'm sure those links will be very useful. We'll try and share those in the chat as well. So I just wanted to move on to a slightly different topic, and we touched on it earlier. I think, Bill, you brought up the topic of diversification in terms of what we're producing as a nation in manufacturing. I think that's an interesting element of the strategy and how we can look to improve our export activity as a nation. So I suppose in the first instance, maybe Michael, I can start with you. You know, diversification is a key theme of the modern manufacturing strategy. In your mind, what do you think a more diversified manufacturing industry looks like in Australia?
Well, I think it's incumbent on all of us to spread the opportunities around collaboration. How can we support each other as an industry? And you've heard me say it earlier that we need to break down the barriers between our universities and industry. And so we do that through our AMGC projects, where we co-fund initiatives to demonstrate our research and put it into action. So we just got an additional $30 million through the federal budget to do more projects. So have a look on our website for the 82 projects we've done so far across a range of industry sectors, from chemical road tankers to drone technology and food production and so much more. The key thing here is how can we export more? because Australia is really a small market, but we've got 7 billion potential customers right around the world. And so recently we had Ambassador Arthur Sinodinos launched our latest project, which was a company called Omnitanker in Western Sydney. They've developed new technology and patented technology for building chemical road tankers. And think these big semi-trailers thundering down the road, they're normally made out of stainless steel, but Omnitanker have made them out of lightweight composite materials. There's now 3, maybe 4 now, hitting the roads in the United States. And Arthur Sinodinos, our ambassador in Washington, was able to launch that project. And so now we've got manufactured goods in Australia heading off to the highways of the United States. And so these are the job opportunities and the growth of Australian manufacturing that we can export around the world. That same company is now looking at growing opportunities in the European market. So plenty of examples that we share at AMGC. Diversification for companies could be into sectors like defence, as I spoke about earlier. A good example there was back when the GFC, we had companies that I know of in Newcastle. We're looking at the downturn with the mining sector as well. Mining was turning down and it was impacting on local engineering firms. So at that time, they looked at getting into defence back around 2010, 2011. And then those companies that did venture into the defence space started winning contracts. And as mining picked back up, the whole company lifted. But what came with it was the skills that came with it. The ability to do the QA and the paperwork that was needed for defence also helped their business in the mining sector to show the quality, also the safety side of things as well. So diversification is a strong tool, but it can be done in so many ways. And we've got so many examples on the AMGC website that tell the story.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, and it's really interesting. And I think I've seen a lot of those examples myself, and there are some great stories out there. I suppose it's therefore interesting when we look at the economic rankings. Maybe this is more of a historic thing, but the Atlas of Economic Activity ranks Australia only 87th out of 133 countries for economic complexity. And I suppose, Adelaide, it'd be good to kind of get your take on this. Our ranking's actually fallen there in recent years due to a worsening diversification in exports overall. I don't know whether there's anything you've seen, Adelaide, around any factors that might be a reason for this. And I suppose, the modern manufacturing strategy is designed to help reverse some of this trend and improve diversification. I mean, do you think that will be possible and something that the strategy will be able to achieve?
Yeah, I do think that there is possibility to increase the diversification of our exports if these industries are supported, emerging, more complex kind of manufacturing industries, and certainly if they have that leg up, there's a lot more likelihood that they'll succeed. I think one of the reasons that we have seen our rankings be really quite low is because there have been some really strong incentives to focus our manufacturing efforts on mining. So there's been some really strong commodity prices. We've seen demand for oil and other kind of, coal, other critical minerals really rise over the years, as we've seen more air transport, as China has really ramped up industrial activity and increased the demand for those global commodities. We've seen the profits there, and when the profit is there, the investment is very easy to go there. Australia has always been called the lucky country. It's because a lot of our exports and industry have been, digging stuff out of the ground and taking advantage of our natural resources. But, there's also a lot of reason to take focus away from those areas. So we're already seeing a lot of countries really look into their greenhouse gas emissions and their environmental impacts. These are things that do reduce some of the commodities that we sell. We also know that, for our own country, those kind of things are something that, looking at economic activity is only one part of the puzzle when it comes to a society and an economy. And in the longer term, climate change does pose risks for us locally. In our other industries, it poses risk for well-being, health, as well as economic activity. And so diversifying has a lot of benefits outside the very direct financial benefits. I think, renewable energy is a really great example where it actually can lower ongoing costs of energy for some businesses and households as well. You take the very simple household example. If you stick some solar panels up, it costs you a few grand, but then suddenly you're paying a lot less for electricity. You can do that for businesses. And so, we do have a lot of potential, but because the money has really been flowing into mining so strongly, that's probably crowded out some investment in other places. Superannuation funds need those yields to be high. People aren't getting any money from their bank account savings anymore. So we are searching for yields and quite sensitive to that. If we can move that needle a little bit, I think there'll be a lot of possibility.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. That's really great context, and appreciate that. And I think, Bill, it'd be great to bring you into this discussion as well. So as Australian manufacturers do look to diversify some of their operations into import-export markets, supply chains are likely to become more and more complex and even vulnerable, as we've seen during COVID. So I guess, is there anything that you've seen that you'd suggest manufacturers can do to diversify at the same time as effectively managing some of those risks? Is there any sort of tips that you might have around that?
I think the simple message revolves around the idea of the portfolio effect, and which basically says you spread your risk over a number of destinations and a number of supply chains. So that's the easy answer. I can't sit here and say to an SME manufacturer who is entering global markets one step at a time and is got a very productive contract with a particular firm that is necessarily detrimental. Of course, it's not. It's part of the growth curve. But I'd put it to the listeners that supply chain resilience, supply chain risk management all begins within the business itself. So yes, here and now, I have a supply chain because I'm servicing a market or a client, but ultimately my business plan and the supply chains that go with it need to spread, and they need to be different. Is it the case that most businesses control the means by which their goods enter other markets? They don't. What they do control are the choices in who's providing the services, what regulatory barriers due to a particular market are they going to go up against, and the sum of all of this is the efficiency of their supply chain and their landed cost. Now, all of those things, of course, go to, is it profitable? Is it worth doing? Can I sustain it? So, if you like, the supply chain analysis and discussion is an integral part of business planning and strategy. And I think, as everybody says, you know, we're only going to go so far on import replacement in Australia through manufacturing means. The only scale opportunities are offshore. What does that look like? It cannot look like China. And I'd argue it cannot look like India. It has to look like a lot more different economies that recognise Australia as a source of a differentiated product of high quality. I mean, we had a discussion earlier, I think it was Michael who was talking about, you know, recognition of Australian goods in overseas markets. You know, there's a lot to be said about what brand Australia means and what it needs to mean in order to access those markets in ways that we don't at the moment.
Absolutely. And yeah, look, it's obviously a very interesting topic at the moment. There's a lot in the media, as everyone's seen, around the China relationship and the tensions there, and obviously the tariffs they've put on our wine recently. And some of these issues are going to be ongoing, not just China, but there's other international trade tensions out there, and these can pose challenges for export-oriented manufacturers, and it's obviously something that they'll need to contend with, and the strategy's designed to sort of help some of our exporters to reach some of those markets. So I suppose, Bill, is there anything that you'd say around, you know, how the modern manufacturing strategy, you know, is that going to be enough to support some of these businesses, or can the Australian government be doing more to perhaps support or subsidise some of our manufacturers without falling afoul of any of their international obligations, for example, around anti-dumping, etc. So it's a bit of a minefield, I know, but be interested in your thoughts around that topic.
Well, I think what we also need to recognise is that there's a bit of a fallacy of composition effect working its way through in these kinds of broader topics. What do I mean by that? I mean, the policy is being mirrored in other countries. So the generic response to COVID has been de-risk supply chains, de-risk supply of critical goods, strategic goods, and everybody's talking about the same thing: onshore, downstream processing, all the same ideas that we're talking about. So what does that mean? It means that we're going to have a different form of competition. And in response, I think that probably needs a more flexible approach to what re-establishing manufacturing in this country means. And I mean by that, it's got to be more than just, to take your example, Michael, a factory in Dubbo selling widgets to a country offshore. There needs to be a number of models of engaging in foreign markets. Some of those might even be foreign direct investment. So we may need systems and government recognition of the fact that our businesses, to succeed in certain markets, have to take their IP and their ownership and some capital and set up in another place. Now, the Adelaide's example of the mining companies are really global businesses who are spreading profits to shareholders who are all over the world. We need to emulate that to some extent in our mix of approach to rebuilding manufacturing. We have to be in positions in some countries where we are repatriating profits to Australia because of successful market interventions elsewhere. Along with all of that, there's been also a regulatory response. I think the World Trade Organization statistics have shown a significant rise in protectionist measures over the past 2 years in particular, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that not only are other countries doing what we're doing, but they have either greater focus on existing border controls on imports, or they've instituted new ones. Now we're living, if you like, the experience of anti-dumping and other trade disruption with certain trading partners at the moment. There are other forms that can take. I'll be upfront about it. The EU is famous for its technical barriers. So where we're talking about highly transformed goods from Australian factories that may not have the right voltage or some other aspect that needs intricate approvals from the destination market, these will be things that we need to navigate. Pulling all of this back, it is a concern of the business to understand the requirements of foreign markets and choose appropriately. We can't afford, in the first instance, to choose markets that have standards that we can't meet. We go for what we can. And doing a good job in the right market is as effective as getting extraordinary economic rents in markets where we can only have a touch point. So we need, just as the government, if you like, in policy is picking, loosely speaking, picking winners in terms of what sectors it will support, those sectors have to be smart in terms of where they put their effort and who they sell to.
Excellent, thanks, Bill. And I guess Michael or Adelaide, did you have anything that you wanted to add to anything Bill's just said?
Yeah, I think we're getting old hands at this, Bill. We're getting used to these Zoom calls, and the feedback we get from people that are listening in has been great. It's a privilege of mine to go around the country and walk the factory floors and meet the business owners. And I think to Adelaide's point around energy, that's one of the key inputs is the cost of energy. So I know as a country we need to do all we can to lower the cost of electricity, and as a key driver for manufacturing, that would really help. So we're seeing various reports coming out around energy across the various states. But for me, I believe we've got to do all we can to look at energy, because that's just one of the key things to really boost job growth here in Australia. But to Adelaide's point around being with the mining side, yes, we've always been known as the lucky country. We've got great resources. It's one of our nation's strengths. But I'd rather see us become the smart country. and how can we convert those natural resources, which we earn a fortune from. The ability to send coal and iron ore and other resources around the world is what we've built our country on. And we've got this high standard of living. I like to think that Australia is a superpower, and our superpower is our lifestyle. Where else in the world would you love to live? But how do we maintain that lifestyle and boost an income off our resources? For me, that's about adding value here in Australia. And so we've got some projects that we're supporting at the moment around lithium mining. And so if you can mine the lithium and then send it off on a ship, why wouldn't we look at doing something with it here? And so we're supporting projects that can turn that lithium and build batteries here in Australia, and then we'll export that value-added product all around the world. Another project is a scandium mine in Western New South Wales. So scandium is a rare earth product, and the project that they're looking at is lightweighting bus chassis. And so this material will turn into a new metal alloy, which is 30% lighter than aluminium, and yet at the same time it's around 30% stronger than aluminium. So if we can make bus chassis out of that here and add value and high skilled jobs right here in Australia, we can then create these new chassis and send them around the world. So these are the potential value added projects we can do in manufacturing to add to the natural resources we already have. And if we can achieve that, wow, that would be transformational.
Great point. Thanks, Michael. I think I just want to pick up, there's an audience question that's come through that sort of ties into this topic, and it's be a good time maybe to put that to you guys, and maybe Bill, I'll get you to have a go at this one. So the question is, how can we protect local manufacturers against low-cost imported items? So I guess, again, sort of a little bit the opposite of what we were just talking about. So this is, imported goods coming in and competing with our local manufacturers at a lower cost point. Can't we impose tariffs to protect our local manufacturers? So, similar to what we've seen the Chinese government doing, do we think Australia should be adopting that kind of strategy, or is that just not a good way to go about dealing with this issue? Do you have any thoughts on that, Bill?
It is true to say that once again, probably a quarter of a century of policy settings in the realm of trade liberalisation has seen tariff barriers fall in this country, on average mostly to zero. I think the average actual tariff rate is something around 0.8% across the board. So the trend has been down. The provision of free trade agreements to, if you like, mop up residual tariffs by virtue of direct engagement with other countries has again lowered the tariff barriers. Is it a possibility that the government imposes tariffs? Absolutely, they have the power to do so. These international agreements only work by virtue of domestic law. Is it a great time to further call into question international rules around tariff barriers, which again have all been trending downwards? It probably isn't. I would put it to the listeners and the panel that, a little bit like some of our trading partners, some of our best controls and some of the best competitive aspects of Australian goods have been their conformity with known standards, the accuracy of their contents, the purity of what they do. We, in theory, have those controls at the border also about incoming goods. And it's my observation over time that those controls have lessened. We are spending less time with our border, through our border agencies in examining what's coming in. I mean, the asbestos issue over the past few years has been an excellent example of all of these things that have asbestos in them not being declared, etc. Similarly, if we're looking at low-cost production of significant industrial or consumer goods, we can sort the wheat from the chaff without putting, if you like, an explicit cost burden on their price. We can say, you can come into this country, but you will have to conform, if you like, incur the same costs that Australian businesses incur in reaching a particular standard that is acceptable under our law. If we go down that path, I think we're probably halfway to sorting out, you know, who are genuine competitors and who are not. And so the message is there are other border controls than financial ones that I think are probably going to be far more effective in the long run in illustrating the superiority or otherwise of Australian goods.
Thanks, Bill. And I suppose just one more point that I wanted to touch on before we move on to another topic quickly, because I know one that when I talk to my clients in the industry, a lot of them are still experiencing supply chain disruption at this point in time. It's still a major challenge. Obviously, that COVID brought a lot of disruption, but there's still a lot of issues there in terms of getting goods into Australia and the lead times and things like air freight and shipping freight being extremely expensive at the moment. Part of the modern manufacturing strategy is the supply chain resilience initiative, which I suppose I was wondering, do you think that will go some way to help address some of these issues? Bill, be good to get your thoughts on that, or do you think that some of them are kind of here to stay and we'll have to adapt to a bit of a new normal around supply chains?
I think, look, it's true to say that, again, over the last 20 years, supply chain constraints and concerns have grown. They haven't reduced in the post-COVID era. The mantras really are about how to de-risk supply chains and in the least cost method. So in Australia, subject to significant changes in transport arrangements, there is only a degree of factors that can be controlled. Having said that, once again, supply chain issues are in part at least determined by origin and destination of trade. So if we've got everything going through the South China Sea, inbound and outbound, we're concentrating our risk in one place. If we're dealing with 15 countries in different parts of the world, presumably we're using 15 or 7 different supply chains to do it. So that kind of diversification is helpful. In terms of the government policy, I'm sceptical that, from the point of view that I think it's coming from the wrong end. I think, again, this is about business planning. This is about, we're not going to increase the number of ships coming to Australia via this policy. We have defrayed the massive cost of shifting a lot of our exports to air freight and dealing with air freight for perishable goods, etc. But have we been, successful in doubling or tripling the number of flights coming into Australia? No, we haven't. So there are things we cannot control. And I would put to the listeners, the prime determinants of supply chain resilience, risk, and everything else, again, starts with the choices made within the businesses. So once again, on this call, I'll speak my mantra of businesses taking control and understanding issues in how they operate and where they sell is the first best step in determining what risks they're up against. Now, after that, it becomes a calculation of risk-benefit. And, people will continue to take unfortunate choices around supply chain activities because it's the least cost and because the consequences of delays, etc., aren't great. If we're talking about the widgets that keep a production line going, then obviously the risk is greater and the spillover effects are greater. So we can plan around that, but it's a business activity first and foremost. Policy may or may not assist.
Excellent. All right. Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Does Michael or Adelaide, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or has Bill pretty much covered it?
One of the greatest examples I have around supply chain resilience is when we needed the ventilators. In the first few weeks of March, when this was all coming through, government reached out and said, we're going to need ventilators. How can we do that? And so we brought 30 local manufacturers together and built a whole new supply chain. These companies didn't know each other before, and now they're collaborating to build ventilators, and we've made 2,000 of them to date, which is fantastic. Thankfully, they're all going to the national medical stockpile because we don't need them, which is just great news. But now we have this opportunity to, now that we've proved that we can make this complex bit of equipment, and we've got the skills and the know-how to do that, why don't we look at these 30 companies being able to export that technology? And so this is, we've proved that Australian manufacturing is capable. We have the capabilities here in Australia to make complex equipment, and now we need to look at exporting those great new products that we can create right here in Australia. So it's more than just our natural resources, it's our skills and ability as well, and our universities and research organisations have a part to play in that too.
I think when we look at, you know, some of the living standard flow and effects from manufacturing, you know, we do as a country want to be looking at higher skill, you know, higher value products, because, you know, we're never going to be able to compete with some of those emerging Asian economies on making cotton shirts, on doing the basics. We don't have the land costs and we don't have the labor costs to deal with that. And I think the solution there is not to reduce labour costs, because that just reduces living standards and increases inequality, which creates other problems down the line. We want to find ways to have less price sensitive products, and that's really where that complex technology comes in. It also frees up money and resources to actually allow more research and development too. If your renewable energy is a great example of that. If you're spending less on your electricity, you know, month to month, you might have a little bit more spare cash to, you know, keep wages the same and also put some money into research and development. You might be able to increase productivity along those lines, and the more that we invest in increasing productivity and increasing innovation, the more rewards we're going to get in the long term. So looking at that long-term strategy and that higher complexity, which may have a bigger upfront cost, will certainly have a bigger reward down the road.
Great point. Thank you, Adelaide. And I think, yeah, we're almost out of time. I've just got probably one last question, and I might put this to you, Michael, if that's okay. I just wanted to touch on the part of the modern manufacturing strategy that's around job creation. And it's an interesting one because obviously the creation of jobs is a key focus of the strategy and the job maker plan as well, and for the wider economic recovery. The manufacturing sector, as we know, has gone through a lot of significant change, even pre-COVID. It's been moving, you know, in terms of towards transformation, towards more high-tech, Industry 4.0 technologies, etc. So I suppose, interestingly, we're probably seeing, you know, less opportunities for a significant amount of employment, I guess, in the production side of the business or mass production. Do you have a view around what the future of you know, manufacturing jobs looks like, you know, and how that might tie into this strategy? You know, are we seeing more highly skilled jobs? What are you seeing out there when you're talking to the manufacturers?
Yeah, far from it being the normal call that you hear about robots taking the jobs. The companies that I talk with that install robots and automation and the like are increasing jobs. They're growing their business because the automation and the robotics improves the whole manufacturing process for them, and those companies grow. That's the good news. But I think we all have a story to share with the community and our neighbours and friends that manufacturing has a bright future here in Australia. You know, we risk skipping a generation if we don't talk about manufacturing and what's going on out there right now. It's not the smokestacks, it's not our grandfather's manufacturing. This is modern manufacturing happening right now, today in Australia. The high-skilled jobs are there, the high-paying jobs are there. We never will be a low-cost country, but we always have been a trading nation. And so we have this fabulous brand that we all share, being Australia. And so the more we can produce products here and brand them Australian-made and send them to the world, this is the opportunity. It's really a nation-building exercise, and we're well on our path to doing that. I just would reiterate that I really believe that energy has a key role to play here, because if any country in the world should have cheap and reliable energy, it should be Australia. So I hope to see more efforts towards that, that's for sure.
Excellent, thank you. And I can't think of a better way to end the discussion today with that fantastic positive note. So thank you to all of you. Thank you, Michael, Adelaide and Bill, for your valued insights today. I'm sure everyone listening will agree that it's been a great discussion today. Please do feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions about what's been discussed today, or anything about any of our previous webinars as well. And if you did enjoy today's session, then please do register for our next Rethinking Manufacturing webinar. As I mentioned, it's the SME's Practical Guide to the Modern Manufacturing Strategy, and that's happening next week on the Thursday, the 10th of December. So finally, before we close the session, I'll just quickly mention there's a short feedback survey that will launch once we close the webinar. We'd very much appreciate it if you could just spend a few minutes filling that in so we can get some insights for our future sessions. And once again, thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you again to the panel, and we look forward to continuing these discussions on our future webinars. So thanks everybody.
All the best.
Cheers.
Thank you.